So in this video, we're going to talk about the poetry of Dharmakirti, who was a 7th century poet and Buddhist monk in India. And I am reading his work out of the Norton Anthology of World Literature, which, as always, has only a very small selection of Dharmakirti's work. But the poems that we do have here show us some really interesting things in terms of how Buddhist philosophy, ethics, the Buddhist worldview get incorporated into and expressed through poetry. So the Norton Anthology includes 3 poems, which I think are a really interesting selection. One of them is, it's an ethics poem, realistically, but it does some interesting philosophical and theological work. So the poem goes like this: never to ask the wicked for favors, never to borrow from a friend of meager means, to be kind and loving in disposition, just in action, not to play foul even at the hour of death, to stand upright in misfortune, to follow in the footsteps of the great. It's hard to do this, as hard as it is to walk on a sword's edge, but good folks don't need a sermon about it. So this poem is really quite cool because it works in 3 basic portions, three movements almost. The first 3 stanzas are laying out these ethical principles of Buddhism, shunning the wicked, being selfless, being ethically upright, just, etc., etc. Then the last 2 stanzas take us in different directions. The penultimate stanza, it's hard to do this, as hard as it is to walk on a sword's edge. This stanza acknowledges the ethical difficulty, the practical difficulty of living up to the principles of Buddhism. So that's important. That's an interesting twist, because again, one of the themes that so often runs through theological, religious, philosophical works is the challenge of being an ethically good person, even if it's important, even if the stakes are incredibly high. It's difficult to do. It's tough to be an ethical person. And so this is the first kind of reversal, maybe, of expectations that we get in the poem. Because again, we start with, here are the ethical principles that a good Buddhist should follow. Then we have the reversal. This is difficult to do. This is challenging. This is not an easy path. But then we have another reversal in the final stanza. But good folks don't need a sermon about it. So this idea, this is interesting because we have almost a contradiction here. Because on the one hand, the penultimate stanza tells us it's difficult to be an ethically upright person, but the last stanza almost tells us the reverse. Good people who are ethical in their hearts, whatever it is, will find it easy to be good people. Will find it easy to be good Buddhists. To live a good life is easy to do for an ethically good person. So we have an interesting reversal. And this idea of paradox, this idea of contradiction, of challenges, is really central to Buddhist philosophy and the Buddhist way of expressing theological principles. So we get that to a certain extent here. Some of the other things we get with Dharmakirti's poetry included here is a real sense of ephemerality. this idea of the transitory nature of existence, that while existence is struggle, while existence is suffering, which is one of the foundational principles of Buddhism, that struggle is also temporary. The nature of existence is complicated and contradictory. So we get this, for instance, in this poem, which is about a Buddhist monk's journey, a spiritual journey, the quest for enlightenment that monks undergo. So the poem goes like this. There's no one riding ahead of me. There's no one behind me. There are no fresh prints on this path. Am I alone? I see that the road the ancients opened up long ago is overgrown today, and I've definitely abandoned the other wide and easy thoroughfare. So in a way, this is Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken through the lens of Buddhist philosophy. But what I think is really, really striking about this poem is this idea of aloneness, the singularity of the journey. And yet it's the journey of the ancients. It's the journey of the Buddha, of bodhisattvas, of those who have reached enlightenment. And so this is clearly not a path that Dharmakirti is walking alone. This is clearly a path that others have followed and others have shown the way for. And it's the harder path. We get that element of it at the end, but I think the sort of easier, or I think the more interesting thing about it is this idea of feeling alone on the path, and this idea of suffering, which again is foundational to Buddhist theology, but this idea of feeling like the path is overgrown, the path is lost. And I think there's an element of the transitory nature of existence, because things change, things develop, they grow, etc., etc. But we also see this idea, and also the idea of contradiction, the paradoxes of Buddhist thought in more secular poems, like this first one in the Norton Anthology. Your union with your lover will be very brief, like a dream or a magical illusion, and it will end in distaste. I reflect on these truths 100 times, but my heart can't forget that girl with the eyes of a gazelle. So again, we've got the transitory, ephemeral nature of existence. Your union with your lover will be very brief, like a dream or a magical illusion. We've got the element of suffering. It will end in distaste. But we've also got the paradox here. We've got the contradiction of the poet persona recognizes these truths, recognizes the ephemerality, recognizes the nature of suffering, and yet is still drawn to the beloved, is still in love. The poet persona is still human, is still within that network of desire that, according to the Buddha, leads to suffering. So we've got those sort of paradoxical recognitions and contradictions and things like this.